The studio lights don't just turn on, they ignite. A soft hum ripples through the set of The View, the kind of quiet tension that only exists right before something unforgettable happens. Cameras glide into position. The audience settles, but not quite comfortably. There's an energy in the air, something heavier than a normal daytime segment. And then she walks out. Zendaya. Composed. Measured. Effortlessly calm. But tonight, there's something different in her eyes. Before we step into this moment, make sure you subscribe to Talk Battles, hit that like button, and tell me in the comments. Do you think calm always wins over confrontation, or does silence sometimes speak louder than words? Because what's about to unfold isn't just an interview. It's a quiet storm. Across the table sits Sara Haines, known for her warm tone, her relatability, her ability to ask questions that feel light, but sometimes cut deeper than expected. To her left, watching carefully, is Whoopi Goldberg, EGOT winner, industry legend, a woman who has seen every kind of conversation unfold on this stage. And somewhere beyond the conversation, whether physically present or simply hovering in the weight of legacy, is the influence of Denzel Washington. Because when Zendaya sits down, she carries more than her own voice. She carries the lessons of those who came before her. The applause fades, the smiles settle, and the questions begin. Sara leans forward slightly, her tone friendly, but probing. So Zendaya, you've had such an incredible rise. From Euphoria to films like Dune, you've become this symbol of control, grace, and intention. But I have to ask. A pause. Not long, but long enough. Do you ever feel like you're holding back who you really are? The audience shifts. Zendaya doesn't answer immediately. And that silence, it's not hesitation. It's calculation. Because she's heard questions like this before. In interviews, on red carpets, in headlines that try to define her before she speaks for herself. Her fingers rest lightly against the table. Her posture remains perfect, but her gaze sharpens just enough to signal something deeper. When she finally speaks, her voice is soft, measured, but every word lands with precision. I think, she begins, people confuse privacy with absence. The audience goes quiet. Sara blinks, just slightly caught off guard. Zendaya continues, her tone never rising, never breaking. I've always believed that not everything has to be explained to be real. Not everything has to be performed to be understood. Whoopi's eyes narrow, not in disagreement, but in recognition. She's heard this kind of control before. She's lived it. Zendaya leans back just a fraction. And honestly, I think we live in a time where people are uncomfortable with things they can't fully access. A ripple moves through the audience. Because now, this isn't just an answer. It's a statement. Sara smiles, but there's a flicker of tension behind it. Well, sure, she replies, but when you're in the public eye, fans feel like they know you. They connect with you. Don't you think giving more of yourself helps that connection? And there it is. The push. Subtle, polite, but unmistakable. Zendaya doesn't flinch. Instead, she tilts her head slightly, almost thoughtful. I think connection, she says, comes from honesty. Not exposure. A pause. And honesty doesn't always mean telling everything. The room stills. Because now the conversation has shifted. This isn't about a career anymore. It's about philosophy. And somewhere in that shift, you can almost hear echoes of voices like Denzel Washington, who once spoke about discipline, about knowing who you are before the world tells you who to be. A man who built his career through roles in films like Training Day and Malcolm X, never chasing noise, only truth. Zendaya carries that same energy now. Quiet, unshakable. Sara leans in again, her tone slightly firmer. But don't you think sometimes that distance can feel like a wall? The audience reacts, some nodding, others watching Zendaya closely. Waiting. Because this is the moment. The turning point. Zendaya's expression softens, but not in surrender. In understanding. I think, she says slowly, people deserve boundaries, even the ones they admire. A murmur spreads across the room. Whoopi shifts in her seat, clearly engaged now. Because she knows this territory. She's navigated it for decades, from The Color Purple to Ghost, through awards, criticism, reinvention. And she knows exactly what Zendaya is doing. She's not defending herself. She's redefining the conversation. Zendaya's voice remains calm, but there's steel beneath it now. And I think sometimes the expectation that someone owes you constant access can quietly take away their humanity. Silence. Not awkward. Heavy. Real. Sara exhales softly, clearly feeling the weight of the response. But she doesn't back down. Instead, she smiles again, slightly tighter this time. That's fair, she says. But fans would say they helped build your platform. Doesn't that come with some responsibility to let them in? The audience leans forward. Because now it's no longer subtle. It's direct. Zendaya's eyes meet Sara's. No tension. No anger. Just clarity. And when she speaks again, it's no longer just calm. It's powerful. You can appreciate people without losing yourself to them. A beat. And I think that's something a lot of artists before me have tried to show us. Her gaze briefly shifts, not dramatically, but meaningfully toward Whoopi. And in that glance, there's acknowledgement. Of legacy. Of experience. Of survival in an industry that constantly asks for more than it deserves. The audience breaks into soft applause. Not loud. Not explosive. But deeply felt. Because something just happened. Not a fight. Not an argument. Something quieter. Stronger. Zendaya didn't raise her voice. She didn't interrupt. She didn't deflect. She stood her ground, without ever appearing to move. And Sara? For the first time since the segment began, she pauses. Really pauses. Because this conversation isn't going the way she expected. And somewhere behind the cameras, producers exchange glances. Because they can feel it too. This isn't just television anymore. This is a moment. And it's only just beginning. The applause fades, but the tension doesn't. It lingers, hanging in the air like something unfinished. Zendaya sits exactly as she was, calm, grounded, unreadable on the surface. But beneath that stillness is something sharper now. Not defensive. Not emotional. Intentional. Across from her, Sara Haines adjusts slightly in her seat. The warmth in her expression is still there. But now it's mixed with something else. Curiosity, and just a hint of pressure. Because the conversation didn't break. It shifted. And everyone in the room felt it. To her side, Whoopi Goldberg leans back just enough to observe more than participate, for now. Her eyes move between Zendaya and Sara, reading not just words, but rhythm, pauses, and tension. She's seen this before. She knows when a conversation is about to become something more. Sara inhales, resetting her tone, lighter this time, but carefully constructed. Let's talk about your work for a second, she says, smiling. Because clearly, you're not just choosing roles, you're making statements. Zendaya nods slightly. Not performative. Just acknowledgement. Sara continues. Your performance in Euphoria. I mean, that was raw. Vulnerable. Some would even say exposed. A slight pause. Rue is messy. Broken. Addicted. That's not guarded at all. The audience murmurs softly. Because the question beneath the statement is clear. If you can be that open on screen, why not off it? Zendaya's lips press together for a brief moment. Not tension, but thought. She's choosing her next words carefully. Again, acting, she says slowly, is storytelling. Her voice is steady, but it's also controlled vulnerability. Sara tilts her head. Controlled. Zendaya nods. Yes, because it's not my life. It's a character's truth. And there's a difference. The distinction lands, but Sara isn't letting go. But doesn't that still come from somewhere real? She presses. Emotion like that, it has to be pulled from your own experiences, right? Now the audience leans in again. Because this is where lines blur. Personal. Professional. And sometimes uncomfortable. Zendaya exhales softly. Not out of frustration, but grounding. I think people assume that pain has to be personal to be believable, she says. A beat. But empathy, imagination, observation, those are powerful too. Whoopi's lips curl slightly into a knowing smile. Because that answer? That's experience talking. It reminds her of something she's lived through. Decades of stepping into roles that demanded everything, without giving everything away. From The Color Purple to Ghost, she's mastered that exact balance. Sara, however, leans forward again. Not aggressive, but persistent. Okay, but let me ask you this, she says, her tone soft but pointed. Do you think sometimes audiences want to feel like they're seeing the real you? Not just the performer. The question lands heavier than the others. Because now it's not about acting. It's about identity. Zendaya's gaze drops for a split second. Not avoidance, but reflection. And in that moment, the room feels quieter than before. When she looks back up, there's something different in her expression. Not sharper. Not colder. Just deeper. I think the idea of a real person, she begins, is more complicated than people realize. A pause. Because who I am with my family isn't the same as who I am on a set. Another beat. Or in an interview. The audience is completely still now. Listening. Not reacting. Just absorbing. Zendaya continues, her voice calm but unwavering. And none of those versions are fake. Sarah's expression softens slightly, but she doesn't interrupt. Because she knows this is the moment you don't talk over. You're seeing me, Zendaya adds quietly. Just not all of me at once. The sentence hangs in the air. Simple, but layered. And suddenly, the conversation doesn't feel like a debate anymore. It feels like a boundary being drawn, with precision, not force. Whoopi shifts forward slightly now, resting her chin against her hand. Finally stepping in. You know, she says, her voice carrying that unmistakable authority. That's something a lot of people in this business learn the hard way. The audience turns toward her. Because when Whoopi speaks, it carries history. You give too much of yourself too early, she continues, and suddenly people think they own pieces of you. A murmur of agreement ripples through the crowd. Zendaya glances toward her, just briefly. Respect. Recognition. Whoopi nods slightly, as if acknowledging an unspoken understanding. I've seen it happen, she adds. Over and over again. And in that moment, the weight of decades enters the conversation. The kind of weight that comes from navigating fame before social media, before constant access, before the expectation that everything must be shared, explained, justified. Sarah listens, but she's not stepping out. Not yet. But isn't there a balance, she asks, between protecting yourself and letting people feel connected to you? The question is softer now, less confrontational, more searching. Zendaya turns back to her. And this time, there's the slightest hint of a smile. Not defensive, not dismissive, understanding. I think balance looks different for everyone, she says. A beat. For me, it means choosing what I share, not reacting to what people expect. The audience nods. Some quietly, some visibly. Because that distinction, it resonates. Sarah exhales slowly, processing. But then one more push. One more attempt to peel back the layers. Do you ever worry, she asks carefully, that by holding so much back, people might misunderstand you? The question lingers. Because it's honest. And for the first time, there's a flicker of something in Zendaya's eyes. Not discomfort. Not fear. But truth. She leans forward slightly now, matching Sarah's energy, but not her pressure. People will misunderstand you, no matter what you do, she says. The audience reacts softly, because they know that's real. You can explain everything perfectly, she continues, and someone will still see what they want to see. A pause. So I don't live my life trying to control that. Silence. But not empty silence. The kind that settles deep. Sarah sits back. For the first time since the conversation began. She doesn't immediately respond. Because there's nothing to challenge there. Only something to think about. And Whoopi. She watches Zendaya with a quiet, almost approving expression. Because what just happened wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. But it was powerful. Zendaya didn't just answer questions. She reframed them. And now the entire tone of the room has changed. The audience isn't waiting for drama anymore. They're witnessing something else. Something rarer. Control. Clarity. Presence. But the segment isn't over. Not even close. Because there's still one thing left unspoken. The tension between curiosity and entitlement. And as Sarah leans forward one more time, her expression more serious than before, it becomes clear. The next question won't just continue the conversation. It might finally test it. The air in the studio feels different now. Heavier. Not uncomfortable, but charged. Like everyone in the room understands that what's happening isn't just another daytime segment anymore. It's something quieter, sharper, and far more revealing than anyone expected when the lights first came on. Sara Haines sits still for a moment longer than usual, her fingers lightly interlocked on the table. Her expression has changed, not defensive, not confrontational, but deliberate. She's choosing her next move carefully. Across from her, Zendaya remains composed. Shoulders relaxed. Eyes steady. No visible shift in posture. But there's an undeniable sense now that she's fully in control of the rhythm of this conversation. To the side, Whoopi Goldberg watches like someone who has seen this exact moment play out in 100 different forms, but rarely with this level of precision. And that's when Sarah finally speaks again. Her voice is softer this time. But the question, sharper than any before. Let me ask you something a little more direct, she says. A pause. Do you think the way you protect yourself sometimes comes off as distant? Maybe even calculated. The word hangs in the air. Calculated. The audience reacts instantly, some shifting in their seats, others glancing at each other, sensing the shift in tone. Because that word changes everything. It reframes calmness as strategy, privacy as performance. Zendaya hears it. Of course she does. But her reaction? Almost imperceptible. A single blink. A slow inhale. And then stillness. Not the kind that signals discomfort. The kind that signals decision. She leans forward slightly now, resting her hands gently against the table. Not defensive. Not closed off. Present. Focused. When she speaks, her voice is still calm. But now there's weight behind it. I think, she begins, choosing each word with intention. People often use words like calculated when they can't easily read someone. The audience goes quiet again. Not a single interruption. Sara holds her gaze. Zendaya continues. And I understand that, she adds, because we're used to personalities that are very accessible, very expressive, very immediate, a beat. But not everyone communicates that way. Her tone never rises, but it deepens. And in that depth, there's something unmistakable. Conviction. Sara tilts her head slightly, listening, but not retreating. But you are intentional, she presses gently. You think carefully before you speak. You choose what to reveal. That is a kind of calculation, isn't it? This time, the question isn't confrontational. It's probing, trying to define the line. Zendaya nods slowly. And for the first time, she agrees. I am intentional, she says. No hesitation. No deflection. And I think there's a difference between being intentional and being inauthentic. The distinction lands immediately. Clear. Precise. Unavoidable. Whoopi's expression shifts, just slightly, but enough to show she recognizes the weight of that statement. Because that's a line many in the industry struggle to define. Zendaya leans back just a fraction, her hands now resting calmly in her lap. I've spent a long time, she continues, learning how to move in spaces that don't always make room for you. The room stills. Because now, this is bigger than an interview. It's experience speaking. And when you grow up in this industry, she adds, especially starting as young as I did, you learn very quickly that not everything needs to be reacted to in real time. A subtle shift in the audience. People nodding. Understanding. Because they've seen it happen. Young stars pushed into narratives, into reactions, into moments they weren't ready for. Zendaya doesn't name it. She doesn't have to. Her career already tells that story, from early Disney days to the intensity of Euphoria, where her portrayal of Rue didn't just earn praise. It earned her historic recognition, including multiple Emmy wins. But even that success, she never let it define her publicly. Sara listens closely now. Less challenging, more curious. But doesn't that get exhausting? She asks quietly. Always being aware, always choosing. For the first time, Zendaya pauses longer than before. Not because she doesn't have an answer, but because this one is honest in a different way. It can be, she admits. The audience leans in, because vulnerability has entered the room, but not in the way they expected. It's not always easy, she continues. But I don't see it as a burden, a beat. I see it as responsibility. The word lands differently than Sara's earlier one. Not calculated. Responsible. Zendaya's eyes don't waver. Because I'm aware of what comes with visibility, she says. Not just for me, but for the people watching. The younger versions of me, who are trying to understand how to exist in the world. Silence. Deep. Unbroken. And suddenly, the conversation shifts again. This isn't about personal boundaries anymore. It's about influence. Legacy. Impact. Whoopi leans forward slightly, her voice cutting in, low, grounded. That part right there, she says, nodding, a lot of people don't talk about. The audience murmurs in agreement. Everybody wants the spotlight, Whoopi continues. But not everybody understands what it means to carry it. Her eyes move toward Zendaya, not as a host now, but as someone who recognizes something familiar. A kind of discipline, a kind of restraint that doesn't come from fear, but from knowing exactly what's at stake. It echoes something long associated with figures like Denzel Washington, his emphasis on purpose over noise, discipline over reaction. A career built on roles like Training Day and Malcolm X, but defined just as much by what he didn't say publicly as what he did. Zendaya sits in that same space now. Not imitating, but aligned. Sara exhales softly, absorbing the shift. For the first time, her next question feels less like a challenge, and more like a search for understanding. So what would you say, she asks carefully, to people who feel like they can't reach you? Who want to connect, but don't know how? The room quiets once more. Zendaya's expression softens. Not in defense. In clarity. I'd say, she begins gently, connection doesn't have to mean access. A pause. It can mean being seen in the work, in the stories, in the things we choose to share intentionally. She tilts her head slightly. And I think sometimes that kind of connection lasts longer. The audience responds, soft applause, thoughtful nods. Because that idea, it reframes everything. Connection not as constant exposure, but as something deeper, more meaningful. Sara sits back slowly. And this time, she doesn't push again, because she can feel it. The conversation has reached a point where pushing further wouldn't reveal more. It would only repeat what's already been made clear. Zendaya hasn't just answered the questions. She's redefined them. And in doing so, she's changed the entire tone of the room. But there's still something lingering. Not tension, not conflict, something else. The aftermath of a conversation that didn't explode, but quietly shifted perspectives. The cameras are still rolling. The audience is still watching. And somewhere beyond this studio, the world is about to react. Because moments like this don't stay contained. They travel. They echo. They turn into headlines, clips, debates. And as the segment begins to wind down, with producers signaling the final stretch, one thing is certain. What just happened here wasn't loud, but it was powerful. And the impact is only just beginning. The final seconds of the segment don't arrive with noise. They arrive with weight. The kind that settles slowly, over the audience, across the table, into the silence between words that no one feels the need to fill anymore. The cameras are still rolling on the view. But something has changed. Not just in the conversation. In the room itself. Zendaya sits exactly where she began. Calm. Composed. Untouched by the pressure that tried subtly persistently to pull her into something louder, something more reactive. And yet, she gave more than anyone expected. Just not in the way they expected. Across from her, Sara Haines exhales quietly, her posture easing for the first time since the conversation began. The tension in her shoulders softens, not in defeat, but in realization. Because this wasn't a clash. It was a shift. And to her right, Whoopi Goldberg watches it all settle with the kind of stillness that only comes from decades of witnessing moments like this unfold. Moments where nothing explodes. But everything changes. The audience begins to applaud. Not the loud, roaring applause of spectacle. Something more measured, more thoughtful, because they know they've just seen something rare. A conversation that didn't rely on interruption, didn't need raised voices, didn't collapse into chaos. It held its ground quietly, and won. The director's voice echoes faintly from offstage. And we're clear. The camera's cut. But the moment? It doesn't end. It spreads. Backstage, the energy shifts instantly. Producers exchange looks, half impressed, half stunned. One of them shakes their head slightly, almost smiling. That's going to blow up, someone mutters under their breath. And they're right, because within minutes, before Zendaya even fully steps away from the set, the clips begin to circulate. Short cuts of her responses. The pauses. The calm delivery. The line that hits hardest. You can appreciate people without losing yourself to them. On platforms like X, formerly Twitter, and TikTok, the moment spreads like wildfire. Captions flood in. Zendaya just shut that down without raising her voice. This is how you handle pressure. Calm is power. She proved it. Clips of Whoopi Goldberg nodding in approval become reactions of their own. Looped, reposted, analyzed. And soon, headlines begin to form. Not dramatic. Not exaggerated. But undeniable. A masterclass in composure. A quiet response that said everything. Back in the dressing area, Zendaya sits alone for a moment. No cameras. No audience. Just silence. She looks down briefly, exhaling, not from stress, but from release. The kind that comes after holding steady for longer than most people realize. There's no visible celebration. No I won expression. Because that was never the goal. For her, it was never about winning the conversation. It was about owning herself within it. A soft knock at the door. It opens slightly. Whoopi steps in. No cameras following her now. No performance. Just presence. You handled that well, she says simply. Zendaya looks up, a small, genuine smile forming. Thank you. There's a pause, but it's comfortable. Mutual. Whoopi leans lightly against the doorframe. A lot of people, she adds, would have tried to fight that differently. Zendaya nods. I know. Another beat. But I didn't feel like I needed to. Whoopi smiles, just slightly. Because that answer? That's experience talking. The kind she recognizes instantly. It echoes a philosophy she's seen in figures like Denzel Washington. A man whose presence in films like Training Day and Malcolm X was never about volume, but authority, control, knowing when to speak, and when not to. You don't, Whoopi says quietly. And with that, she steps back out, leaving Zendaya alone again, but not in isolation, in stillness. And outside those walls, the reaction grows louder. Clips turn into discussions. Discussions turn into debates. On YouTube, breakdown videos appear within hours. On blogs and entertainment outlets, headlines expand into think pieces about boundaries, celebrity culture, and the pressure of constant visibility. People begin to take sides, but not in the way anyone expected. Not against Zendaya, not against Sara, but around the idea itself. What does access really mean? What do we expect from the people we admire? And where should the line be drawn? Even Sara Haines trends briefly, not for confrontation, but for asking the questions many were already thinking. And that's the twist. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a breakthrough, because the conversation didn't end in conflict. It opened something bigger than the moment itself. Hours later, the clip reaches millions. Comments pour in faster than they can be read. Some praising, some reflecting, some questioning their own expectations. And through it all, one thing remains consistent. Zendaya's calm, her clarity, her refusal to be pulled into something louder than necessary. Because in a world that rewards reaction, she chose restraint. And somehow, that spoke louder than anything else. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think Zendaya was right to hold her ground the way she did? Or should celebrities be more open with the public that supports them? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you felt the power of this moment, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Talk Battles for more cinematic, reality-inspired stories that go beyond the surface. Because sometimes, the quietest voices leave the strongest impact.